It's a crossover Thursday on today's Locked On Giants podcast. Gino Camilleri, co-host of the Locked On Eagles podcast, joins me to break down the Giants-Eagles matchup on Sunday. That's coming up next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. My name's Patricia Traina, and thank you so much for making us your first listen of the day, or if you're watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. And I have a shout out today for Nimar Sekon, who is a subscriber over on the YouTube channel. So Nimar, thank you so much for subscribing to the Locked On Giants podcast. Appreciate you. Appreciate all of you who catch us on YouTube, who catch us on all the audio platforms, Odyssey, Apple, Google Play, Stitcher, wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find the Locked On Giants podcast. And anyway, today's show, we have a crossover Thursday. Gino Camilleri is going to join me in just a bit. He is from the Locked On Eagles podcast. Always great catching up with Gino. He's just a fountain of football knowledge. So excited to have him on the show. And then, of course, I did a segment for Gino on the Locked On Eagles podcast, if you want to check that out, in which we were talking in general terms about the New York Giants. So I will have that information for you in the show notes. And before we get to the crossover segment, just a few random housekeeping notes on the Giants. They did practice on Wednesday. Kadarius Toney not yet back in the building, but head coach Joe Judge said that he should be back in on Thursday. Kadarius Toney, of course, has been dealing with with an oblique injury, and he also has been dealing with COVID after testing positive for COVID when they came back from the West Coast. So Toney should be cleared to return. Whether or not he plays on Sunday, we still don't know, but we'll find out. I have a feeling he doesn't, but you never know. Now, also worth noting for the Giants, with Daniel Jones now officially on injured reserve, the question becomes is who's going to be the starting quarterback the rest of the way? Is it going to be Mike Glennon or is it going to be Jake Fromm? Well, Joe Judge would not say who he was thinking of putting in there as the starting quarterback. He said primarily that he'll give both guys a chance to compete, I guess to earn the position, that they would do some things actually to help, to see if Jake Fromm was ready. And those things, even though he didn't say it, but some of those things include maybe throwing some exotic looks at him and just seeing how he responds to them in practice. Now, my gut feeling is it'll be Jake Fromm. The Giants at this point know what they have in Mike Glennon, and it hasn't been very good. Let's just be honest here. Mike Glennon has failed to put touchdowns on the board in 2 of the last 3 games. And as I say all the time, field goals ain't going to cut it in the NFL. It's just not going to happen. So if you know what you have in Glennon, why not see what you have in Jake Fromm? Who knows? Jake Fromm, if he goes in there and he starts and he does fairly well, maybe he becomes your quarterback 2 next year. If you get Daniel Jones back and he's healthy, and now maybe you don't have to worry about, having to spend a lot of money on a backup quarterback or who you're going to sign to back up Daniel Jones. So my preference would be to see Jake Fromm, but Judge is not ready to announce that. I think it'll be Jake Fromm. I would be stunned if it's Glennon at this point. There's really just no point in putting him in there. But anyway, speaking of the quarterbacks, Daniel Jones did speak to the media on Wednesday. He gave an update on his neck, on where things are. Obviously, this is very difficult for him to have to sit back and not be a part of things, but he basically said that he ran out of time, meaning that the doctors felt that he wouldn't be cleared for contact in time to return this season. The Giants with only 3 games left. So Daniel's just going to write it out on IR. Now, he did say that he was told that he doesn't need surgery at this time. The prognosis for his recovery is good, so there's no concern that, this will linger into next year. But everything's early, folks, and the body is weird. The body can sometimes respond right away. It could sometimes take a long time to respond. So, as I've been saying on previous shows, when it comes to Daniel Jones, let's see what they do in free agency. I think that will give us a big hint as to whether or not, as to where he is, because the Giants will be checking on him, a couple times a month to see how that neck is coming along with scans and all that stuff. So yeah, Daniel Jones on IR. He was out at practice on Wednesday, not practicing. Obviously, he can't practice now, but he was an onlooker, stood on the side there, wanted to be a part of whatever it was he could be. But again, he not allowed to practice, so he could stand there and watch, but he couldn't get on the field and throw passes and all that good stuff. So, but Daniel tried to remain involved, and that's fine. Why not let him stay involved? He's a team captain. Joe Judge allows for that, and it's good for the kids, for his morale. Why separate him from something he loves? And oh, by the way, Daniel did say that he has to learn how to slide, so I'm sure that will be an off-season priority for him this off-season. So hopefully he comes back better than ever before, completely healthy, doesn't need surgery, and just earns that big contract, that next big contract. So we'll see if that happens. And before we get to the crossover segment, I have Mark Schofield on tomorrow's show. Now, I've had Mark on the program before. This will be the first time he's on the YouTube channel. And for those of you who aren't familiar with who Mark Schofield is, he writes for USA Today's Touchdown Wire, and he is a brilliant analyst when it comes especially to quarterbacks and the offense. I mean, the man can break down stuff like nobody's business. He should be a coach or an offensive quality control specialist. He's that good. And I guarantee you will learn a few things listening to Mark Schofield. Super nice guy, by the way. So he will be on the program with me on Friday. You will not want to miss that. We talk Daniel Jones, we talk Mike Glennon, we talk Jake Fromm. He gave me his entire breakdown of all those three. We even talked about what kind of offense would best suit the Giants moving forward. So just so much covered in that show, and that will roll out on Friday, and I hope you will check that out. All right, folks, coming up next, Gino Camilleri of Locked On Eagles joins me for the crossover sections. All right, Giant fans, we have more coming up on today's Locked On Giants podcast. But first, Stat Hero is the first of its kind daily fantasy sports platform where it's you versus the house in head-to-head fantasy matchups. Winner take all. And here's the crazy part. Stat Hero shows you their lineups before you play as you handpick the lineup that you want to face one-on-one. Sign up today for free right now at stathero.com/lockedon for a 100% deposit match. That's stathero.com/lockedon, or use our promo code LOCKEDON for a 100% deposit match. Terms and conditions apply. stathero.com/lockedon. And welcome back, Giant fans, to the crossover section of the Locked On Giants podcast. And as I've been promising, Gino Camilleri joins me. He is one of the co-hosts of Locked On Eagles. You saw him just a few weeks ago. He is back. Gino, first off, happy holidays to you. How are you doing?
Same to you, Patricia. I'm doing well after Tuesday night's victory, and I just realized that I'm wearing almost giant blue coming on to the show for our friends on YouTube. So maybe I jinxed it, but yes, talking about a few weeks ago, that was arguably the lowest point for the Eagles in the last couple weeks here, and we have to hope that seeing me on your screen at Locked On Giants isn't deja vu for the Giants to get another victory in this game, because I know they want victories because they've been in a rough little stretch, but the Eagles really need them here. They have to finish off down the stretch to push into that back part of the wild card. And after beating Washington on that delayed week, this team is roaring and ready to go. They were very amped up in that game, and I think they're excited and chomping at the bit to get back against the Giants.
I'm sure. And of course, that was the last game that the Giants won. They have since lost, I think, the last three in a row. That was the last game Daniel Jones played in. So a lot has changed from the Giants' perspective. But let's talk about the Eagles. And yet you kind of went where I wanted to start, and that is with the short work week, the disruption in the schedule. How have the Eagles responded? I know, today was a new day, probably not much time for a day off. So where are the Eagles at? And of course, they also had Nick Sirianni test positive for COVID. So a lot of stuff going on within the last, 24 hours or so. Where are the Eagles mentally, and, any concerns about any of this, disruption in the schedule?
I thought at first that this team would have a little hiccup in the road getting ready for this game. Maybe they took it a little too personal that the NFL pushed it back. I know that the guys were upset in the locker room, much like the Seattle game as well. But they're all focused on the division. They know what they had to do coming off of this bye. And I mean, it might be a blessing in disguise that it did get pushed back 2 days, because Jalen Hurts played arguably his best game of the season against Washington. And that hiccup did come in the first quarter. They really were sleepwalking after the bye with those additional 2 days of rest as well. They come out with a victory after that game, and then your head coach goes on to the COVID IR the very next day. But I brought this point up on our show yesterday that Nick Sirianni comes from this line which stems all the way back to Andy Reid and Doug Peterson in Kansas City. And if people remember, when Doug Peterson was there in Kansas City, he was calling plays for the Chiefs in their 2-minute offense. So then he comes here to Philly, and he has Frank Reich underneath him. Then Frank Reich gets involved in situational play calling. And then guess who's under Frank Reich in Indianapolis? It's Nick Sirianni. So this thing has kind of come full circle, and he has set up Shane Steichen, our offensive coordinator, in this same sort of regard, where he does get situational play calls in games, to where if they did have a hiccup, i.e. your head coach going on the IR due to COVID, that maybe he could pick up right where they left off. And it might have been just to get guys experience back when Andy first started doing that with Doug in 2015. But now it's out of necessity in this COVID world. I know the Giants have faced their fair share of guys on the COVID IR list, and it goes all the way to the coaching staff down to the guys on the practice squad. Nobody is not susceptible to this thing, and you have to be prepared. This Eagles team has faced adversity the last 4 seasons, with the Super Bowl run starting when Carson Wentz tore his ACL. They're just going to keep facing adversity as long as I'm a fan, and especially in this new generation of this team.
Yeah, and this COVID situation across the NFL has been wild. It just seems like, what are they up, over 200 people now that have tested positive in the last couple of weeks? I mean, and now they want to roll back the testing, which I'm not sure I understand the logic there, but whatever they want, I guess. I mean, who am I to question it?
Yeah, that's the NFL. Whatever they want, they will do. That is for
yes,
sure.
Including moving teams, games around just to get them in on the schedule. Yep. But let's talk about Jalen Hurts. You mentioned he had one of his best performances. I think was it 79% or 71%? It was a high percentage of his completion. I forget the number off the top of my head, but
might have been 77 if I'm not mistaken.
So, I mean, all right, okay, yeah. I knew it was in the 70s. So what is it about Jalen Hurts? I mean, because when we saw him a few weeks ago, he was jittery, I guess, for a lack of a better term.
Yes.
And he has, I guess, gotten more comfortable, more sure of what he's doing. So what changed? Did they change things up with the play calling? Is it just confidence in the line? What do you see as the biggest thing that, the biggest difference in him?
So, yeah, coming off of that Giants game, how I judge a player, and I get this from my scouting background, is he a player you win because of, a player you win with, or a player you win in spite of? And in that Giants game, Jalen Hurts was a player that they had to try and overcome his 3 interceptions, and he was a player that they won in spite of. And then going into the first quarter of this game against Washington, the first drive he's out there, there's a bad interception off of Dallas Goedert's heel that would only happen on a Tuesday night football game. And then the very next drive, he fumbles the football when there's pressure in his face. And Nick Sirianni got in his ear on the sideline, and they showed it on the broadcast. And I really just think that something clicked in Jalen Hurts' head after Nick Sirianni took him aside, because the last time we saw Jalen was in that Giants game. We hoped that Gardner Minshew in that Jets game would kind of give Jalen a different set of eyes on how to see the field. And early on in that game, it didn't look like it. But once he went down in the stretch of that game and was completing big-time pass after big-time pass, and he had a few drops in that game, which would have put him over 80% completion percentage in this outing, he just really became a guy that they won because of. He was a player that made the throws when it mattered. He picked up the yards with his legs when it mattered. And I don't think it's just one point you can look at with either it's the play calling or just the execution in general. I just think it's what you want to see in an evolution as a young quarterback and the steps you want to take to put him in a position to put this team in a position to win. Because if your quarterback isn't set up for success, the rest of your team isn't going to be set up for success. And Jalen Hurts in those first 8 weeks, and in that Giants game, he kind of did it to himself. But the first half of the season, it really wasn't playing to his strengths. If you watch the game plan that Nick Sirianni put in play in that Washington game on Tuesday night, it was a chef's kiss. It was perfect. Jalen ran it to perfection. And I really think that cohesiveness is there between the play caller, the play designer, and the guy who has to execute the plays. And it takes a little bit, especially with a rookie head coach. But Nick Sirianni, he really seems to get the X's and O's and the player emotional understanding and put those two together and put these guys in a good position to succeed, because this offense has been what Lou and I have wanted. They're putting up 25 plus points per game. The defense is holding teams to sub 20 points. That's a recipe for success in the NFL that I can get behind.
Yeah, definitely. We could all get behind that.
Yeah, I think it's very basic. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. Now, another part of the recipe for success has been Miles Sanders.
Mm-hmm.
I think since returning, and I know you guys had a late bye week. I think it was, I don't remember if it was 2 games after the Giants or something, but I know it was sandwiched in there. But the point is Sanders has run for over 100 yards in each of his last 2 performances. The running game has just been, I think, a little bit more solid. What's been the difference there besides obviously Sanders returning to health?
So the thing is, you look at these running backs and see their statistical output, but the guys that you don't see stats on are the offensive linemen. And Jeff Stoutland, who is our offensive line coach, I said this on our show yesterday, I will put him up against any positional coach in the National Football League as the best respective individual at what they do. He has had so many different types of line combinations in the past 4 years here at Philadelphia, and they were out their starting left guard in Landon Dickerson yesterday. Jack Driscoll, the guy who was their 3rd right guard, has been out the last couple weeks, and they had to fill him in with Nate Herbig and Sua Opeta at left guard. And it just comes down to how well they block up that run game. The offensive linemen really make that thing churn. And then you have Miles Sanders and Jordan Howard. We can't take away from what he has done. The 2 guys that are running with exceptional vision, running behind their blockers, really trusting that offensive line. And you could see the trust is there, because there's a clip going around on YouTube and on Twitter right now of Jason Kelce making it to the second level, going stride for stride with Miles Sanders. And when you have an offensive line that is willing to run 45 yards down the field for you as a running back, you're willing to punch that ball into the end zone for them. And it really comes down to the cohesiveness between those 2 units. If they didn't have a great offensive line, Miles wouldn't be the first 100-yard rusher in back-to-back games since 2014 for this team. It goes hand in hand. But Miles is a very special runner. His explosive plays are up there with the best of them this year. His yards per carry in the last 8 weeks has been at the top of the NFL. He's really a guy that if they're going to win, going down the stretch, it's going to be on the back of him, Jordan Howard, Kenny Gainwell, and Boston Scott. Those 4 guys back there all throughout the season have gave exceptional efforts behind different combinations of offensive linemen and still had success. 7 games in a row now going over 175 yards on the ground in the year 2021. That's exceptional football, in my opinion. And you win up front, you win in the run game, especially in December, especially in the NFC East when you're playing in these bang-bang games where these guys are hitting each other in the mouth. If you can wear down a defensive line, you can win in this division. And they're going to need to continue to do that down the stretch here.
All right, Giant fans, we've got more coming up on today's show. But first, we know it. The Giants aren't going to be in the Super Bowl this year. But you know what? There's no reason that you can't be. And you can be there at Super Bowl 56 at Los Angeles SoFi Stadium with On Location, which is the official hospitality partner of the NFL. On Location allows you to select your exact seats and customize your elite experience, which includes an exclusive pregame celebration with NFL legends, 5-star Los Angeles hotels, and foods prepared by the legendary chef Wolfgang Puck. Visit onlocationexp.com/SB56 for more information or search Super Bowl On Location. The Super Bowl will be here before you know it, and if you want to be there, get there with On Location. Again, that's onlocationexp.com/SB56. All right, Giant fans, still more to come on today's Locked On Giants podcast. But first, it's the most wonderful time of the year as college football gears up for the bowl season. The NFL season is coming to a close when the playoffs are taking shape, and the NBA and NHL are in full swing. And no matter what sport you follow, BetOnline has you covered all holiday season long with more props, more odds, and more lines than ever before. Head on over to their new and updated desktop or mobile website at betonline.ag and sign up today for an account. And when you use our special promo code LOCKEDON, you will get a 50% welcome bonus. Again, that's promo code Locked On. So don't wait. Take advantage of all the amazing offers that BetOnline has today. Visit betonline.ag and get your 50% welcome bonus with the code Locked On. All right, Gino, let me backtrack a little bit. These two teams just played last month, a few weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
So the memory is still kind of fresh. How much are you anticipating the Eagles changing things up against the Giants, or do you think they're going to stick pretty much with what they've always done well and maybe just tweak it a little here or there?
Well, one thing, I don't expect Jalen Hurts to have 3 interceptions in another game against the Giants. The Murphy's Law, everything that could go wrong went wrong in that game. And now the law of averages is going to come back into play. And I think he comes back to earth a little bit, especially after the way he rebounded against the Washington defense that even with the guys on COVID, they were still a tough test. They were in his face. Montez Sweat got him on a couple QB hits. Deron Payne had a big hit on him up front, a big one-handed sack on him. So he wasn't in a clean pocket all night long, and he was still putting the ball in a position to where it needed to be. I think the Eagles will continue to win on that run game, make sure that Jalen Hurts doesn't have to pass the ball too many times, put him in between that 17 to 25 attempt range, which they've had him in since week 8 in the season, where they really were pass heavy for that first half. Now they kind of have him in a controlled, it's like when they have a pitcher on a pitch count almost. He's almost on a throw count. If he goes over 25 throws, you know you're probably playing from behind. You know you're in a situation where he's turned the ball over a couple times. As long as they take care of the football in this game and continue to go on the back of this run game, I think they'll have a better outing than they had the last time against the Giants, where they went scoreless for nearly 4 quarters of that game. And Jalen Hurts, up until the second quarter of that Washington game, went scoreless in 4 of his last 5 quarters. So they turned it around in a big way in the final 3 quarters against Washington, and they have to carry that over, because if they do what they did against the Giants and slip up once again, it's not just one of those hiccups in the middle of the season. This is a season ender. That could seriously end their run at the playoffs. And especially against a division opponent, you don't want the Giants to be able to brag about that going into the offseason.
Now, the good news for the Eagles is they have won the last 7 games played at Lincoln Financial Field. What is it about that place that just makes it a house of horrors? I mean, the Giants have had some really bad things happen to them there.
you're talking about 7 games straight against the Giants, correct? Because they haven't won 7 games
right,
straight.
7 games straight against the Giants at Lincoln
it.
Financial Field. Yes.
Yeah, they've only won the last 2 at Lincoln Financial Field. So this season has been one of those ones where they've been road warriors, and then at home it's kind of been hit or miss. But if you heard the crowd in that Tuesday night game, it really was an electric atmosphere. And you said it. I've been at some Giants games in Lincoln Financial Field, the one where the Eagles shut them out on Sunday Night Football. I think that might have been 2014 or 2015. It's just one of those places where division rivals, they come there and the fans do not make it easy. And there's just something about this game where you had to get that 2-week delay or 2-day delay against against Washington, and then you just come off of a bad outing against the Giants. That is sitting in the back of their mouth, that bad taste, and they're not going to let the Giants come into Lincoln Financial Field. Fingers crossed when I say this, fingers crossed. I'm not promising anything because I'm a very big jinx when it comes to this team. But if they do what they did against Washington and the defense comes out there and they're flying around and they're completing big runs on offense and grinding the Giants down, it could be a place where in these late months in December and January, where it's cold and an offensive line is just grinding your defensive line down, and you have to stop a big running back in Jordan Howard and then tackle a guy like Dallas Goedert. And then on the other side of the ball, you have Fletcher Cox and Javon Hargrave playing their best football, and you can't even throw at Darius Slay at this point in the season. So when all of those things are going right, especially at home with that fan momentum, people talk about the 12th man in Seattle. They talk about Kansas City, how loud it is. Patricia, I know you've been to Lincoln Financial Field. You know how loud that stadium can get, especially against the New York Giants. And it could go the other way, and Giants could come in there and slap the fans in the mouth and make them real quiet and start booing rather quickly. But I hope it's not a repeat of a couple weeks ago, because this team knows what's ahead of them. They know their destiny is in their hands. And that's a lot different than when you're just playing that first. It was the first division game of the year. You didn't know what you were going to get. Now you know what it takes to win these division games. It's a little different this go around. And fingers crossed, like I said, I hope things go right like they did in those final 3 quarters against Washington.
Yeah, indeed. Now, let's talk a little bit about the defense. I mean, what's new with the defense? Where are you concerned with the Eagles defense? And, you know, they're going to be facing a banged up Giants offense. I mean, the Giants do have most of their skill position players in there. They're without Daniel Jones. We don't know who the quarterback, well, we can guess who the quarterback's going to be, but nothing official as of this taping. I got to think the defense is probably licking their chops right now.
Yeah, I mean, last week, even against Garrett Gilbert, they were susceptible to a big Terry McLaurin catch over Darius Slay. So we know that Darius Slayton could always get the Eagles on one nice double move, and that could happen. And that could be a thing that opens up the game. But the one thing that the Eagles have done well to make it where you have to hit those deep shots with a very efficient number is they've taken away the run game. Where they've gotten good on offense is the run game, but where they've been strong on defense is taking that away for their opponents. Last game, they held Antonio Gibson to less than 30 yards on the ground. They held Washington to less than 70 yards total in a game plan where you knew they were going to try and run the football against you with their starting 2 quarterbacks out of that game, and they have to field a guy who they just signed off the practice squad from the Patriots just a few days earlier. So when the Eagles are playing that sound gap football and the linebackers are catching things that spill to them, they are very good. Where they are weak is still in the pass game in the middle of the field when they have to have their linebackers in coverage. They've been better in zone where they can kind of squeeze down in the middle, but if they're in man-on-man looks to the outside where they get these linebackers outside of the hash marks closer to the numbers, they could be very susceptible to one-on-one matchups. And also, outside of Darius Slay, the other side is Steven Nelson, who is not a very good cornerback, and he has been the one weak spot of this team all season long. If I'm an offensive coordinator, I throw Darius Slay's side of the field completely out the window, and I say, how can we target Steven Nelson? And with the Giants having most of their skill positions there, can you overload that side of the field? Make him think in those zone looks where he's in just contention to either take the deep route or stay down on the under route, and make him confused, because he is a guy who doesn't like to get dirty in the tackling game. He hasn't been around the ball all that often outside of one big turnover earlier in the season. So you go at the weak spot of this defense, and I think it's at that second cornerback, and I think it's trying to get a guy like Saquon in a one-on-one matchup against a linebacker out of the backfield, or even motion one of your running backs out to the slot, because they are very susceptible to those areas where you have to have these linebackers in Alex Singleton and TJ Edwards, who aren't the greatest athletes, cover guys who are incredible athletes. It doesn't make for the best measure of success, I would say.
All right, final question for you, Gino. What's the X factor in this game, and who's it favoring?
Just like the last game, the X factor I thought was Jalen Hurts. If he doesn't turn that ball over 3 times, I think they're in a much better position to win. And I don't know who it's going to favor this time. He still had 2 turnovers in the last game. Can you get to him early and often, have him turn the ball over, and put them in a precarious position in terms of field position where you could capitalize on that? Because the Eagles were down 10-0 to Washington in that game, and they got into a rhythm quickly. We know that a superstar like Saquon could take over a game. They could be beat by a guy like Darius Slayton on the outside. So make sure you just have your quarterback do what he has to do, because if you're in short field positions for that defense, they have been scored on in those areas. The Giants did it to them a couple weeks ago. Basically do everything as your quarterback opposite of what you did a couple weeks ago. Just don't do that, because that was how you lost the game. Be a guy you can win because of today. But I would say if he doesn't have a good game, man, the Giants can upset them on any given day. Did I think they could have upset them a couple weeks ago? Yep, I said that these games, throw the game plan out the window in the NFC East, and here we are again. I didn't know what they were going to get against Washington. I don't know what they're going to get against here. If the Giants are up 10-plus points at some point in this game and the Eagles come back, I could see it. Or if they blow the Eagles out, I could see it as well. I just don't know what to look for in this team week to week. The consistency is the final thing. I would say that's the biggest X factor for everybody's consistency.
Sure, absolutely. And the Giants just playing out the string at this point. So we'll see what happens.
I mean, feel your pain from last year, Patricia. Don't worry.
Yeah, no, you haven't felt our pain because it's been a decade.
Hey, I had to sit there and watch Eli win 2 Super Bowls in a couple of years stretch there. So you got 2 rings. You got to get one sooner or later. Bring a little bit more glory back here to the NFC East. Get it back to the days of the late 80s and early 90s. That's for sure.
Well, the good news is that every year it seems to be a different NFC East champion. So Dallas won it this year.
Go yep.
So next year it's up for grabs, hopefully. So. All right. Great stuff, Gino. He is Gino Camilleri. He is one of the co-hosts of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Make sure you check out the Locked On Eagles podcast. I will be talking Giants with Gino, and I will post the information in the show notes if you want to check it out, which I recommend you do. Gino and Louie do a great job covering all things Eagles. As for me, Giant fans, make sure you tune in tomorrow. I have Mark Schofield on the program. We are talking Giants quarterbacks, Daniel Jones. We're talking Jake Fromm. We're talking Mike Glennon. And what does the future hold for the position? It's a great show. You won't want to miss it. So for Gino Camilleri, I am Patricia Traina. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in, and we will catch you tomorrow.